This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
What an absolutely wild election result in British Columbia. We got Rob Shaw coming up in just a quick second to take us into it. The BC NDP still in power, like kind of, sort of, mostly everybody thinks. We're going to find out what this means for stability. I don't know that there's been a closer election in Canadian history. Looking forward to checking in with Rob on that. And then we're going to turn our attention to Lebanon. Israeli airstrikes have created, in what was already a tenuous and circumstance that could only be described as a full-blown crisis. These airstrikes exacerbating those challenges. Oxfam Canada is part of a conglomerate, a group of those doing humanitarian work in the country. We'll talk to their executive director, Lauren Ravon, and positive reflections today presented by Kuby Renewable Energy. If this feature is designed to get you smiling, to knock your socks off, to start your week off on the right foot, then boy, do we ever have you covered with a North Vancouver resident who invented something as a joke that's now being used by black bears that travel through the region. It's a bear door. Curt Scheewe is going to join us to talk about his viral success. This show is made possible with the presenting sponsorship of Business Career College, that's putting out the call right now to financial advisors and senior finance professionals that want to level up the services you're providing to your clients. You know, this new generation of investors, the next gen, so to speak, is very curious about things like decentralized finance, which means they're going to have questions about Bitcoin and the blockchain and EFTs, and you want to be able to, of course, answer those with confidence, with authority, give them the advice they deserve. That's why you're going to want to make sure you get the brand new CDAA designation, that Certified Digital Asset Advisor, from our friends at Business Career College. They've been leaders in financial training since 1997. And right now, because you're hearing about this on Real Talk, you stand to save 20% off the investment into your career when you use the promo code Ryan20. That's all one word. Get signed up for the CDAA designation today at businesscareercollege.com. Well, David Eby is still the premier of BC, and his NDP, while surrendering some seats, still coming out on top. This BC provincial election absolutely down to the wire, and we may be even getting ahead of ourselves as several recounts will be underway over the next number of days. It's the NDP with 46 seats, the Conservatives with 45, the NDP leading the popular vote by like 1%. Rob Shaw has been covering this for many years and probably around the clock for the past few days as a well-known political commentator, a political podcaster, of course, for Check News, fiercely independent, and for media outlets across the country. Thanks for waking up early for us this morning, Rob. It's good to see you.
Thanks for having me on, Ryan.
Is this the wildest election you've ever covered? I mean, at least results-wise?
Well, no, because we had a similar one in 2017 in BC that was a government, the BC Liberal dynasty that we had out here ended up in a tie with the NDP, and the Greens held the balance of power, which is sort of where we are right now. And it's kind of deja vu all over again. And at that point, you had the Greens choose to side with the NDP in a confidence and supply agreement. It brought the Liberal government of Christy Clark down. And then it was supposed to be a 4-year partnership. And in year 3, the NDP turned on the Greens, ripped up the deal, called an early election, and took their majority. So now here we are in 2024 with the NDP asking the Greens to help them again in this near tie, and the Greens going, hey, fool me once. And so that's the beginning of the discussions. They'll be very different than 2017.
Yeah, no kidding. The Greens with 2 seats, but their leader, Sonia First, now losing. So how does that factor in, do you think?
Well, we think that she may remain leader, at least for now. She doesn't have to be elected to be the party leader. She could have a different role. She has experience going back to that 2017 deal. And the 2 Green MLAs who are elected are rookies. And so they might need a little support navigating this, because we saw in 2017, the Greens take on suddenly all of the burden of government. They're consulted on all the bills. They're consulted on all the moves that the government is going to make. There's a small staff. There's only 2 or 3 of them, and they're up against the entire massive bloated bureaucracy of the premier's office and the civil service, and they get swamped. And so they're going to need experience, and Sonia Furstenau might stick around to help them.
Is this, a lot of people are saying that David Eby maybe potentially kind of sort of blew it by not calling a snap election about a year ago. Do you agree with that? Can you take us into the argument that those folks are making?
Well, the argument was that John Horgan, retired because of a cancer diagnosis, and he left David Eby a $6 billion surplus and a 20-point lead in the polls at an opposition at that point that was divided, and that David Eby could have gone to the polls early and walked away with a majority. He had this ambitious plan to fix housing, to go after mental health and addictions problems and solve those. To do all sorts of things. And instead of calling the election, he essentially tabled his election platform at the start of his premiership. He had a 100-day action plan, which is usually what happens after you win an election. And he had all these ambitious legislative changes, and he did them. Instead of calling an election, he did them, all of the things he wanted to do instead, and said, I will show you visible progress at the end of this and where we want to go. And it turns out 22 months is not enough time to show that visible progress. The housing situation is not any better. The healthcare situation is worsened. The addictions crisis has worsened. The cost of living crisis has worsened. And he went from being able to secure that majority to telling the electorate to re-elect him on a plan that he didn't have a full term to implement. And the electorate was kind of like, I'm not sure you're on the right path anymore. And so that may have been a squandered opportunity for him.
I was talking to Amanda Alvaro a few weeks ago about this, and we were referencing David Eby sort of appealing to Health Canada to rescind, or you might say dramatically, to recriminalize hard drugs after that pilot project in Vancouver went a little bit sideways, didn't go the way that he wanted. My take on it was, you wondered if it could be a liability at the ballot box, that people look at that and say, well, that was a big flop. That didn't work. Your plan didn't work. Amanda's take was a little bit different. She said, no, I like seeing a politician that says, well, I can walk something back if it's not happening, and can kind of acknowledge that. Do you think things like, you referenced the opioid crisis, the housing crisis. Are people in this situation now saying, yeah, I can see John Resta and the Conservatives doing a better job on this, or were there other factors at play? Why do you think it was just so darn close?
Yeah, I think there is an ability to change direction as a leader, and I guess I would agree with Amanda on some of that. The art of the pivot, it usually involves an apology and an admission that you were wrong. And David Eby has not been traditionally good at that. John Horgan was very good at that. He'd say, shucks, I messed this one up. I tried my best. We hear you. We're going to go in a different direction. David Eby has always kind of prided himself as being sort of the smartest guy in the room. He has run things by himself, and he surrounded himself by unelected special advisors who tell cabinet ministers what to do. And when he pivoted on decrim to back away from it, he did it after 6 months of telling everyone, mayors, business groups, people who were seeing things with their own eyes, that they were wrong, that they were fear-mongering, that they didn't understand or support people in their addictions crisis recovery journey. So he pivoted after gaslighting, which I don't think works, without really admitting and apologizing for the move. And in that sense, his changes, including the carbon tax, reversing on the carbon tax to oppose it, after telling Canadians and British Columbians he'd be the last man standing in Canada to support it in the face of Pierre Poilievre possibly becoming prime minister. The pivots didn't work. So we had a lot of changes, but not a lot of humility. And I think the strength of the Conservative brand, federally and provincially, is this kind of like, I'm going to tell you what we're going to do. You might think it's crazy and you might not even like it, but I'm going to tell it to your face and you're going to know, and you can vote for it if you want. And that's the opposite.
This carbon tax stuff on the left has been really interesting to watch trends-wise. I'll acknowledge the two names I'm about to invoke did not win the Alberta NDP leadership, but I thought it was pretty interesting. Raki Pancholi sitting in this studio when launching her leadership, and head and she's named her deputy leader. For what that's worth, I think that's worth a lot. She said it's time to re-examine the carbon tax. Sarah Hoffman said kind of sort of the same thing in response to that, and I think a lot of people, Alberta progressives and maybe people across the country, are going, whoa, wait a second, what's this all about? But you can't help but wonder and probably conclude that at least part of the political strategy is it's tied to the prime minister. And right now, people don't particularly want to be tied to the prime minister. Are you reading anything federally, any storylines into what happened in BC over the weekend or over the past week, let's say?
Yeah, I mean, well, David Eby and Justin Trudeau used to partner on a lot of things, and he has had to distance himself from the Trudeau factor. David Eby's fought Pierre Poilievre in the public realm on housing policy and on the carbon tax, and so he was offside from that wave. I think the BC Conservatives are not affiliated with the federal Conservatives in any way, but they have drafted a logo that looks similar, a color scheme, a language, kind of message box about common sense change. Pierre Poilievre did not endorse the BC Conservatives or campaign with them, but a lot of people still thought they were voting for him. So there was the Poilievre factor. There was the federal Conservative wave. There was a feeling of frustration from some federal Conservatives that they got to take out in the provincial polls. It was certainly a factor. The problem to go back to the carbon tax and David Eby's pivot on that, is he did it randomly in the middle of an unrelated press conference halfway through in response to a second question from a reporter, which is not, I don't think, how you would frame a major policy a reversal like that. And he didn't really get to explain it in the way that I think some people might have wanted him to explain it, and maybe progressives could have tried to explain it as a cost of living measure.
Rob, you retweeted a post from John Rustad, from the Conservative leader, who shared that a couple of years ago in 2022, he was kicked out of the BC Liberal Party on his birthday. I didn't realize that, by the way. He talks about his personal journey. People can read it for themselves, but he considered early retirement, said his wife convinced him to keep fighting for BC. He called his good friend, who's now his chief of staff, suggested that they meet with somebody from the Conservative Party of BC at that time at a pub in Vancouver. They shared a pint of Guinness. I wonder if they split the G. I don't know. They fast forward 2 years later. They say now to the over 800,000 British Columbians who believed in common sense change, our work is just getting started, as he raises his glass to cheers. For a lot of people across the country, they've been trying to make sense of what's even going on. Like, what are the parties now? There's been branding changes and flip-flops and new opportunities, and now people are trying to sort of figure out exactly who John Rustad is. Some people suggest he's like, the kids are eating the insects and he doesn't believe in human-caused climate change and all this kind of stuff, and other people think, well, he might just be a common-sense, steady-eddy kind of a guy. What's your take on the now leader of the official opposition who just barely lost this election, and we're still waiting on some recounts?
Yeah, well, all those things are true. Certainly he's motivated by having been fired from the previous center-right party in BC, the BC Liberals. He took that opportunity to go and take the dust cover off of a party called the BC Conservatives that was being kind of organized out of frustration by some of the federal Conservatives in BC who didn't see a place for themselves in the BC Liberals. And so he joins the BC Conservatives. The federal Conservative organizers take over the BC Conservatives. It starts to pick up momentum in the polls, starts to pick up donors, starts to get defections, and the BC Liberals end up in a death spiral, and down they go. Now John Rustad is the guy. He does have the hardest job in politics, Ryan, as you know, which is being opposition leader. Especially with a new caucus, some of whom, there's a guy elected as part of his caucus in Surrey South, Brent Chapman, who's the husband of federal MP Carrie Lynn Finley, who made some just outrageous comments on social media about Muslims and all sorts of different things, found himself in trouble in the election, locked himself in a utility closet when the TV cameras from Global came to ask him comments in his own constituency office. Now, I assume, is out of the closet physically in order to become the MLA, but no one's seen or heard from him, and he won. And so John Rustad's got a caucus of people like this that he has to manage now. He has never been known as a leader of people, but he's the leader of this movement. And so that is kind of a fascinating thing to watch. Can he remain as opposition leader until we have another election? There's a lot of one and done in politics these days. You get one shot at the electorate, and then your party eats you alive, and you never get to face them again. Can he hang on? We don't know that. He's kind of an untested leader who stumbled into this job and has risen to the moment. He's worked very hard. but his future is uncertain.
Yeah, no kidding, to say the least. That locked in the closet thing was wild too, because if memory serves, wasn't it the president of the BC Conservative Party that started tweeting, like, journalists are there to do the interview, and she starts tweeting at them like, this is why people hate you, why people hate the media. And she decides to go flamethrower on the whole thing. It was wild.
Yeah, I mean, the Conservatives didn't quite go to war with the media like I thought they would. Have had some good relationships with them, but they felt every now and again like kicking the media was good for them, and maybe it is. They viewed being invited into the Conservative campaign office as some sort of a transgression, but that's the job, and parties don't like it, and that's the way it is.
That's the way it is.
But we didn't really have the war the same way that you might have expected in a campaign.
Yeah. Hey, in closing, I appreciate your availability. People right now, I guess, are, there will be some hopefuls that are, sort of have their fingers crossed around these recounts. Some of them are very, very tight. But in the meantime, so David Eby's still premier. The government is still functioning. The lieutenant governor will not be getting involved. Like, can you sort of, in a few sentences, sum up where we're at right now?
Yeah. So the premier is still the premier. He gets the first chance to test the House. He's still the government, and we're waiting for him to cut a deal with the Greens, which we think he will, name a new cabinet, and probably come back in February. He doesn't have to come back right away. Maybe he chooses to come back earlier. That's sort of where we are at. This recount next week may change things, likely not. And so for the foreseeable future, we still have Premier David Eby and the NDP government for as long as that lasts, and as long as they can cut a deal with the Greens. And it's unlikely we will see John Rustad as premier, but you never know.
Crazier
he could
things
be back
have
in the
happened.
polls here in less than a year.
Yeah. Hey, Rob, awesome job covering this election. If people want to dig even deeper, they can check out your piece. They've just hit publish on it hours ago at theorca.ca. David Eby lost this election, even though the BC NDP won. Rob kind of makes the argument around majority and minority governments. Make sure you follow him on Twitter. He does great work as well for Czech News, including the political podcasting there. Thanks again, Rob. It's good to see you.
Thanks for having me on.
We appreciate it. We're going to head over to our friends at Oxfam Canada. We're going to go like halfway around the world, basically, in just 60 seconds. They're doing really important work there. I'm sure that this one has been on your radar as Israeli airstrikes have intensified. First, I want to remind you these conversations do not happen without the support of amazing partners like our friends at California Closets, the absolute best in the business at what they do. We had friends over this weekend, and one of them thought I was talking big game about being able to slam the cabinet doors and watch them close slowly. So he walked up and tried it out himself, and it blew his mind. I could tell that it brought him just as much satisfaction, or maybe almost just as much, as it brings me. 10 years after we had our entertainment center done in our main family room, it is still delivering joy and, of course, increases the value of our home as well. Not to mention what it does for helping us organize all of our games and puzzles and chargers and, well, everything else, right? California Closets has a team experienced enough to work with any space and any budget. No job is too small, no job is too big. You can learn more about what they do and request a free consultation with their design team by checking out californiaclosets.ca. For those of you that are looking to turn over a new leaf, open up a new door, pursue a new opportunity, Athabasca University is here ready for you anytime. It's Canada's open university at athabascau.ca, where your only commute is to your device. They've got world-class accredited online degrees and courses designed so you can complete your education wherever and whenever it works for you. You can check out their programs and courses, learn more about student supports, including financial supports, at athabascau.ca. Lebanon's grappling with a severe crisis right now involving economic collapse, political instability, and the like for about 5 years now. That country's been facing hyperinflation, unemployment, and currency devaluation, not to mention political gridlock, not to mention the 2020 Beirut port explosion. You remember that? Meantime, tensions with Israel remain high. 3 weeks ago, from the date that we're doing this interview, Israel dramatically intensified its airstrikes on Lebanon. Lebanese authorities are citing more than 1.2 million people affected, while the United Nations suggests that almost 800,000 1,000 Lebanese citizens, Syrian refugees as well, have been internally displaced in Lebanon. Lauren Ravon is doing, incredible work with Oxfam Canada. It's a consortium of humanitarian agencies that are doing what they can amidst this crisis. That's where Lauren's executive director, and she joins us live this morning. Lauren, thank you for making time for us. You've seen crisis all around the world. Obviously, these are people in absolute desperate circumstances. How bad is this one right now in Lebanon?
Oh, I can't even tell you how bad it is. I mean, things have gotten from bad to worse to even worse this past year. Just when you thought the situation in that region couldn't get any dire after what's happening in Gaza, as you said 3 weeks ago, everything went to hell in Lebanon. That's a country that was already really struggling. I think you mentioned that in the intro, but almost half of the population was already living below the poverty line, even before the Israeli strikes and entry into Lebanon. And now we have about 1 million people that are on the move. And when you hear on the news people being forced to evacuate, it's not evacuations. It's literally pick up your kids, get a loved one in a wheelchair and start moving, get on the road and leave now. We are hearing from colleagues who live in Beirut that the public parks and the streets are filled with people living outside because there's nowhere to go. So many people are on the run today in Lebanon.
So this is, we cite sort of, some of the challenges that Lebanese people have been facing over the past 5 years or so. But how much worse did it get over the past month, over the past 3 weeks? Like, was there 2 months ago hope or optimism that some of these things were going to be sorting themselves out? For the benefit of our podcast listeners, your face just dropped when I asked you that.
Yeah, no, there wasn't. At the time, the only hope was that the war wouldn't spread directly into the country, and now that's not the case. So, over 2,000 people have been killed. We know that probably over 10,000 people are injured. And let me just tell you one thing that I think really sums it up, that shows you how bad it is in Lebanon today. People, hundreds of thousands of people, are fleeing back into Syria from Lebanon. So if you're in a place where fleeing by foot into Syria is your best bet for safety, it's telling you something about how bad it's gotten in Lebanon. People don't have any confidence that the situation will get better, and so are looking for safety wherever they can. And people fleeing into Syria do so sometimes at the peril of their life. They know they could be persecuted, and yet they feel like it's a safer bet because they're not going to be at risk of being bombed today or tomorrow with their families. And we're, at this point, with people moving with no kind of major state support, it means people don't have access to water, kids are not in school, there's not enough access to food. It's getting colder now. A lot of our work with Oxfam and members of the Humanitarian Coalition is getting very basic things like blankets and mattresses, so people actually have somewhere to lie down, spend a night, be warm enough to survive the next day.
I'm referencing BBC's reporting. So this is as you and I are speaking. I mean, just overnight, another wave of Israeli airstrikes hitting Hezbollah-linked banks across Lebanon over the past number of hours. Lebanese state media is reporting further strikes on southern Lebanon over the past few hours. Can you comment on the relationship or how this manifests itself with this Iranian-backed militia, this terror group Hezbollah, and the average Lebanese person? Like, what's that dynamic like? How can Canadians endeavor to understand that?
I mean, like almost in any place in the world, think of us here in Canada. Most of your daily life has nothing to do with politicians, with infighting between political groups, with politics. Most of your life is, going to work, putting food on the table, getting your kids to school, thinking of how you're going to take care of your elderly parents. Most people have nothing to do with this conflict. They're just trying to get by. And already, most people were already living in poverty. So it's just a daily struggle to get by. It has nothing to do with the politics we talk about. And my concern is that there's so much focus on this conflict, on militant groups, on the bombing, on the geopolitics, and not enough focus on the fact that it is a majority of women and children who are now suffering, who are now displaced, living in very unsafe conditions, another generation of kids that are going to be out of school in a context where, going school can be your lifetime to a better future. So, people totally uprooted. And we're also hearing, and I hear this from my colleagues who have kids themselves who are in Lebanon, profound, profound trauma, especially among a generation of kids that are going to be deeply traumatized and impacted from what they've seen. Friends and neighbors being killed, being told you have to run in the middle of the night. You can imagine what a toll that takes on people.
I spend time thinking about that all the time when we have if I can say, the privilege of speaking with people like you that are steering these agencies and groups doing this work. Children in Gaza, children in Israel, children in Lebanon, and obviously other places around the world as well, where you recognize that this is a journey for them that will last for decades, and the trauma, I think, that is being inflicted and imposed on these young children will have lasting impacts through generations in some circumstances. Can you talk to us about what this humanitarian coalition is and sort of how Oxfam Canada fits into that?
Yeah. So when there's a major disaster, an earthquake, a war, flooding, the Humanitarian Coalition comes together to raise awareness of the situation among Canadians and raise funds so that we can collectively respond on the ground. So the Humanitarian Coalition is made up of the 12 leading humanitarian organizations in Canada, including Oxfam. And what's great about the coalition is that we're very complementary. So for example, Oxfam is very known for our work related to water and sanitation. So trucking in water when necessary, repairing waterways, providing sanitation kits to women and kids who have been displaced. And then other members in the coalition might be more focused on providing direct food aid, emergency school services for kids that's been displaced. So by working together, we're really that much stronger and more effective. So we're not duplicating efforts, we're coordinating together. And in the Canadian context, we, as a humanitarian coalition, work with the government to help boost fundraising efforts in Canada. And so the government of Canada has announced a dedicated match up to $3 million for any Canadian that gives to the Humanitarian Coalition's emergency appeal for Lebanon. That donation will be matched dollar for dollar. And I really want to encourage people to go to together.ca, which is the website of the Humanitarian Coalition, and make a donation today. $10 become $20, $100 will become $200. It's really impactful. And I want to be totally upfront with you. We're struggling to raise the resources here. This conflict is being covered really from the angle of war and not from the angle of people who are suffering on the ground. We need to get these stories out, and we need to get more donations quickly because sometimes it's a matter of minutes. Water is not something you can go without for several days in a row. We need to be getting clean water to communities today, food to communities today. And our fundraising efforts have been slow. We're not seeing enough of a pickup among the media and just awareness of how bad this crisis in Lebanon has got. And again, as I told you, if you're fleeing for safety, that says it all. This situation is bad and we need to be getting aid today. So I would really encourage anyone to give. All donations will be matched until November 3rd. So there's still a little over a week to go. We're really hoping to ramp up fundraising efforts in these last few days.
Okay. I appreciate you spelling that out, by the way, and letting people know that there's been kind of a disappointing response to the fundraising side. Again, that's together.ca. We'll be happy to do what we can in our circles and have this audience push it out to theirs. Is that something you kind of alluded to it? Do you think that, do people have donor fatigue? Are people, like, I don't know, pessimistic about peace in the Middle East, so to speak? Do you think it's something to do with the region? Like, what do you think?
So we always see actually that people respond more in the case of a natural disaster. So an earthquake, a tsunami, people tend to respond more quickly in their donations. When it's a war, people wonder, it's complicated, can I make a difference? But whether you are going hungry because an earthquake destroyed your community, or you're going hungry because you've been displaced by bombs, the impact on a kid, on a woman who's just trying to stay alive is the same. And so, yes, there might be donor fatigue, but let's try to compare our fatigue with the news with the fatigue of people who have been displaced, maybe not just once, twice, 3 times in the last 3 weeks, who have picked up their little tarp, their mattress, and moved again and again and again. Thinking in particular of kids, it's hard enough to not be in your home, but then not even know where you're going to sleep tomorrow. So yes, I realize that we're all overwhelmed by what's happening in the world. The situation in the Middle East is very scary, and it's hard to see light at the end of the tunnel. But every day matters for families, civilians who are in these crises, and we actually can make a difference. There's a lot that we can do. Providing drinking water today saves someone's life, and they'll see another day tomorrow. And not having that food, not having that water means that people are at risk of dying.
This is, I think I already know the answer to this, but I want to ask you in closing that, you're talking a lot about water is like time. We're talking about the basic necessities, but the absolute essentials. What about things like mental health supports? Like, is that something, like, do we look at that and sort of go, oh, that's later, or that's not really what humanitarian agencies can provide? Can you talk to us about these kids that are, we don't use this phrase anymore. I used to use it in World War II. We understand more now, but kids that are like shell shocked, kids that are like have had their worlds rattled, that are being woken up by sirens and explosions. Like, are there supports there for the mental health, for the emotional well-being at all?
No, exactly. We need to be saving lives immediately, but you need to be looking at the future. So yes, colleagues in the Humanitarian Coalition provide psychosocial support to kids, also provide things like vaccines. If you're not vaccinated today, you might be next on kind of the polio epidemic, whatever else. So we need to invest in things like mental health support, vaccination, also things like sexual and reproductive health, prenatal care. Life goes on even in the middle of the war, and we need to make sure that essential services continue to be provided. And in a country where public services have been so disrupted, where there's such levels of poverty, the international community needs to step up and provide those services. But I will say one last thing. Just in the last 3 weeks, we know that over 50 medical professionals have been killed in Lebanon. Directly killed. Now, attacking aid workers is a war crime. We need to be speaking out. It is not safe to be operating today in Gaza and in Lebanon. My very own colleagues that I speak to are at risk of dying because they're putting their lives on the line. And it can't be this way. So we need to be, donating so that they can carry on with their humanitarian response, but also speaking up on the need to protect the lives of all civilians and in particular aid workers.
What a reality check this morning from Lauren Ravon, who's the executive director of Oxfam Canada, an important member of this humanitarian coalition. You can donate directly to this. As Lauren mentioned, the government of Canada will match your donation up until November 3rd at together.ca. Lauren, on behalf of our audience, to you and your entire team, thank you for the incredible work that you're doing, and wish you safety and Godspeed.
Thank you so much, Ryan.
Yeah, we appreciate it. If you want to learn more, of course, about the work that Oxfam Canada is doing, you can check out their website. We'll link to both in the show notes. And we welcome your feedback to talk@ryanjesperson.com. Hard to imagine what the young kids, the families are going through there. You imagine, we try to wrap our mind around what this would be like for somebody in a region of the world like this. Mm-hmm. An innocent person that has no involvement in the politics or the deep-seated issues that are at play in that part of the world. But and I'm not trying to compare here like who's the worst off, because everybody's in a tough situation here. But you imagine your family has already fled Syria into Lebanon, and then now you're fleeing Lebanon, going back into Syria. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just can't even wrap my mind around it.
And I think the young kids who have no say in this, they always get the worst of it, right? It's the worst part. I think it goes without saying. So
yeah, isn't that the truth? I see some comments here in the live chat. Mark says, I read Mark's mind. I wonder, Mark, are you talking about exhaustion, fatigue, pessimism about this part of the world? Maybe. Maybe he says fundraising slow because the conflict is never ending. That could be the case.
That's a good point, actually.
That could be the case. Erica says, I think Israel taking military action is completely justified, but blocking off aid and food and water to civilians is beyond outrageous. A lot of people sharing their thoughts in there. We appreciate those of you that join us on the live chat each and every morning on YouTube. You can also be listening live on the Mixlr audio app presented by California Closets. And to those of you that join us later, we appreciate you sharing these interviews, especially I feel like these important ones too, with people that it'll resonate with and with people that might be compelled to do what they can to help. We've got a fun interview coming up in about 10 minutes with a guy who invented a bear door on his fence in North Vancouver. I can't wait for you to hear from Curt Scheewe on why he did it, and the fact that the bears are actually using it is wild. And we've got a great email here from Debbie as well. We did an sort of what do you want to call it, like an alcohol-themed episode? Not really. We did an episode with a couple of authors, a psychotherapist, one of them, who has been on his own journey of addiction, homelessness, and the like. And it resonated in a certain way with Debbie, and I think that her message is important. So we're going to get to that in just a quick second. First, I want to remind you about Friesen Brothers. Now their 17th location, of course, open in the west end of our home city of Edmonton. That's in Glenora. Johnny, you see they have the vegan feast coming up.
Oh, dude, it's on my calendar. It's in my phone. It's on my watch. I'm ready.
November 2nd and 3rd, they've got the vegan feast going down at Friesen Brothers. These are all the Friesen Brothers, the Rabbit Hill, Glenora, Stony Plain, and Fort Saskatchewan locations. These are on November 2nd and 3rd. Enjoy a wide range of delicious vegan options you won't want to miss. Plant-based delights, including their vegan lasagna, the vegan shepherd's pie, the barbecue chicken, there's an asterisk there, but chicken, and the more delicious vegan entrees, plus the full salad bar for just $22 a person.
You can't go wrong there.
No, man.
Come on.
I went there for lunch on Friday to go sit down with the Big Cheese at Friesen Brothers.
The Big Cheese.
And the Big Cheese, And it was unbelievable. Like, the sort of the restaurant setup they have in there.
Oh, it's amazing.
It's incredible.
You grab a pint,
I went with
grab
their
a plate,
smash
you
burger.
sit in there, it's like a restaurant.
Ooh, baby. But it was full. It was full of people that are going there for lunch. We love to see it. Make sure you let Friesen Brothers know that Real Talk sent you when you swing on by. At Complete Care Restoration for more than a quarter century, they've been in the business of restoring properties and rebuilding peace of mind, and that includes communities across the province of Alberta that have been impacted by wildfire, including, of course, Jasper, which is now wide open, welcoming visitors. The team at Complete Care is out there as we speak, getting those projects completed. Some of them demolition phase, some of them fixing the smoke damage, getting the doors back open. You name it, they do it all. Professional property restoration services. They're ready to respond 24/7, based out of Edmonton. You can find them online at completecarerestoration.ca. So it was back on... What was it was just under a week ago. It was October 15th that we were talking to Maureen Palmer and Mike Pond, and they've got a new book out called You Don't Have to Quit. And it's a book that endeavors to essentially help you have hard conversations with the heavy drinkers in your life. Really interesting stuff. Mike comes on the show and shares his own personal story. Mike's an addictions therapist, a psychotherapist who works with people, but also comes at it from a position of personal experience. 15 years ago, Mike was living on the streets in downtown east side of Vancouver after losing his practice, his career to that point anyway, his family, his home, to drinking. Well, Maureen, who's for more than 20 years been an award-winning producer on some really high-profile projects, including For the Nature of Things with David Suzuki. She's an award-winning producer, has been with the CBC. Well, they're life partners, and so they come at this from a really interesting perspective, and they shared with us some of the personal stories, some of their observations, but it didn't land with everybody, and that's understandable. Like, I think when we start talking about, hey, heavy drinkers, you don't have to quit.
Yeah, it's
the title of the book is going to land with people, but some people are going to go, hang on a second, wait a second, what?
Of course.
Right?
Yeah. And
so Debbie writes in to talk at ryanjesperson.com, and she says, 16 years ago, I attended my first 12-step meeting. Says I had relapsed following 4 years of sobriety, within which I had graduated summa cum laude from university. Way to go, Debbie. Says I was just weeks from starting my dream job. I had my first sip of Chardonnay at a graduation celebration, and within a year and a half, I had spun down a dark spiral of alcoholism, which culminated in losing that dream job, having my young teen children physically move themselves out, walking barefoot in winter to a convenience store looking for booze, ultimately wrecking my car and facing DUI charges. I finally had the moment of clarity that Jordan Tutu described, Jespo, in a recent episode of Real Talk. Enough was enough. I had to get help. Debbie says, I began attending meetings with an ample amount of skepticism, but I stuck with it because from the very first meeting, I heard messages of hope, promise, and a manageable life. Most importantly, that I only needed to think about one day at a time. I was fearful that it was a program based in spirituality because having been a religious person my entire life, I felt that I had the God box ticked off. So how could it work for me? I struggled with the concept of being powerless as my willpower had been used to recover my life for the 4 years prior. So while I was learning about the program, I also set out to learn everything that was available based on scientific research. This is what Mike and Maureen talked about on our show, regarding how I was different biologically than the person that could have a drink with dinner and then cork the bottle and call it a day. That was never me, says Debbie. One drink was never enough. And what I learned involves complicated scientific terms that I won't burden you with, but Real Talkers can check it out on the NIH website. It's that alcoholics' bodies break down alcohol biochemically in a way that results in acetate. And if acetate sounds familiar, it's because it's used to make fingernail polish remover. And I learned that uniquely to the person carrying a specific enzyme, our prefrontal cortex shuts down upon consuming the first few drinks. And that's the part of your brain that is responsible for making things like good decisions, moral decisions, spirituality, risk mitigation, and more. It's as if this section of the brain becomes like lights out, nobody's home. And that explains the phenomenon that perplexes alcoholics who mean it when they say that they never meant to drink as much as they did. And learning about the science helped me understand that I have a biological reason why I can never drink again. Debbie says, now I watched your episode with an open mind on October 15th, but I got to tell you, I was extremely uncomfortable with some of the misinformation. Alcoholism is not on a spectrum. However, it is progressive, meaning it always gets worse, not better. I'm worried that somebody who watched that episode may have a seed planted that they can touch fire again by believing they can manage it if they've seen loving, understanding people around them forgive them for their slips. Maureen talked about that. Debbie says this is simply not the case. My 27-year-old nephew had a huge loving family rallied around him, tried to love him into sobriety. We buried him 8 years ago. She says, now don't get me wrong. We learn in the rooms that no human can get or keep another human sober. Alcoholics often have other mental health comorbidities. And I also know several people who stay sober without a 12-step program. But I'm concerned that comments made on that episode may undermine the seriousness of this disease, especially the notion that alcoholics should just do yoga or go for a walk or hug a tree. This is dangerous, uninformed, and inaccurate. Debbie says the reality is I'm an alcoholic, and I must abstain from ever picking up a drink again. And to romance alcohol as something I can do a couple of times a year without consequences is no different than a person who is deadly allergic to bees arguing that they could be a beekeeper. She says, I love your show. I'm a daily viewer on YouTube, and I look forward to it all the time. That from Debbie.
Great
Incredible.
Email. Great email. And I think that's what we're trying to stress in every episode where we talk about this. Number one, we're not doctors. We're not physicians. We're not experts on addiction. Number two, I had that fear too when we were talking about it, that we were like, telling people, hey, it's okay. This guy can do it. Again, addiction is a spectrum. Some people have ways that they cope. And look, the World Health Organization says even like any amount of alcohol is bad for you. It's a toxin. It's this, it's that. It's actually not a toxin, but you know what I mean? You could say the same thing about cheeseburgers and pornography and all these other things. We could argue all day about what's good for you and what's bad for you. But the bottom line that show, I think, invoked was that a lot of people use alcohol to cope, even people who aren't addicted.
Yeah.
Just a drink to relax after work. Oh, I'm stressed. I had a rough weekend. Sunday comes around. I want to have a few beers, watch the game. And I think knowing why you do these things, why you go to the bottle or why you go to drugs or why you go to pornography or why you go to screen time, whatever we're addicted to, knowing why you do it and when and how you do it relates to why you do it is the most important thing. But I agree, that letter, like some people, we said this on the show, we should not advocate for anyone to drink in the first place or do drugs.
Which we're not doing.
No, not at all. But second of all, we know those people, and there are a lot of them who that show was not for them. some people cannot, like she said, touch fire ever again because it can end up putting you in your grave.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was all in the context of when we talked to Maureen and Mike, it's so-called Sober October. Some people call it October, where it's sort of, there's different cancer fundraisers related to it. I know a lot of people do it just for like personal health and wellness. They go, this is the 1 month a year that we're going to take off of off the sauce, so to speak. And for some folks that probably just turns into a habit where, you didn't need it or you didn't miss it for a month. I've got a buddy who texted me the other day. He's off the booze right now. We went to that. By the way, shout out to everybody that showed up at Ged Fest on the weekend. Midway Music Hall. We had so much fun raising money for the Ben Stelter Foundation. Amazing to see Ben's parents there and to have a chance to give them a hug and just send them the love of Real Talkers and the Alberta Cancer Foundation as well. But Hypnotical was there, this hip cover band, and we had so much fun. But yeah, a buddy of mine is he's off the booze right now, and he texts me the next morning. I actually want to read his text. It was so funny. But he reaches out in the morning and he goes, his text says, "What happened?" And it was like exclamation, question, "What happened?" And I was like, huh? Like, I don't get it. And I said, well, like, what do you mean? I don't understand what you mean. And he goes, I don't know. He goes, I just woke up. I wasn't confused. It was a Sunday morning. I wasn't hungover. I feel fine. I still have cash in my wallet. I'm not in a shame spiral, and my truck is in my driveway. This is
Good
Twilight Zone shit, he says. And I'm proud of him for that. That's amazing. That's working for him right now. The last thing we want to do in a conversation is exactly what Debbie's writing in about, which is why we had this is like the Monday morning email we're going to read, is have somebody listen to that and all of a sudden 4 years or 40 years of sobriety is erased. Because
not at all.
They're convinced that they can, ride the lightning again, so to speak.
Not at all.
We don't want that, but we do want to have conversations around things like healthy choices. We want to hit things like alcohol and drug use head on, and not be afraid to have those conversations and not be afraid to talk about it.
We wanted to tell a story of someone who maybe hasn't mastered his addiction, but has had the willpower and the way and the help and the support and a partner who could get them through and still be able to have a drink. But I agree. Like, I know she even said in that letter, alcoholism is not a spectrum. I don't think addiction, I mean, there's different levels. There's different levels of people who, there's some people who hit rock bottom, and there's some people who say, hey, this is affecting work and family time. I got to get out of it. And there's some people who say, I recognize that I drink when I'm stressed, when I want to, some people are like, oh, I need a drink to go to sleep. Don't do that.
No.
Like these are instances when you have to be like, why am I drinking? Right.
Yeah.
But I never want to give anyone, and I'm sure you don't either, or our guests want to give anyone an inkling that addiction, especially someone who's put down the bottle for decades,
100%.
Do not even
but
try to
that's
touch
not
it
what
again.
Mike's trying to do
not
either,
even go
right?
near it again.
Yeah. Cheryl says, I'm unsure about still drinking as a hard drinker. She says, but my hubby's done just that. She says, I'm quietly skeptical and optimistic at the same time, but he's doing it 5 years now, imperfectly, carefully, says Cheryl. It's interesting for sure. That's a great comment. She says, people's stories are never dangerous. But let me tell you, she says, an untreated addict will always find excuses, and a desperate addict will find a way to stop. That is a great comment right there. I appreciate it. Yeah, Garth says culture has a lot to do with it. He says in Jamaica, we see getting drunk as like it's not cool. And it's like kind of a seen as like a bad thing, kind of a terrible thing. He says, well, here, people getting hammered and like drinking 24 beers a night is fine. People almost kind of celebrate it. How about this one from Krabby Chris in the chat?
That one.
Says, I'm a recovering alcoholic, 4 years strong. Way to go, Krabby Chris. I still have the occasional drink. I also accept that not everybody is the same as me. Krabby Chris says, I do believe that alcoholism is a spectrum. Listen to this. Lauren says, meantime, gambling ads on TV are dangerous to some. Let's just say this. Number one, don't take your health or personal wellness advice from Johnny and me.
Please.
We're not certified professionals.
For the love of
and also please do carry on this conversation. Keep this going with us to talk@ryanjesperson.com. We always appreciate your feedback. We try to respond to every email we get. I can tell you we read almost all of them. Except for those of you that are blocked. I'm just kidding. But we love those emails to talk@ryanjesperson.com. Every week, our friends at Kuby Renewable Energy give us a reason to step outside the regular news cycle and sort of start our week off on the right foot. These are the good news stories. These are the ones that are going to restore your faith in humanity and guaranteed to make you smile. It's Positive Reflections, presented by our friends at Kuby Renewable Energy. And typically this is where I'll show you a video or something that a Real Talker has submitted, and it'll be like 60 seconds or maybe a couple of minutes, and then we'll go on our way. But not today. Not today. We have a live interview here. We saw this story of something that was happening out on the West Coast in beautiful North Vancouver, like one of the greatest places to live in planet Earth, where there just so happens to be some bear traffic through residential areas. And, it was causing a bit of a problem, kind of an infrastructure problem, an expensive fix, you may say, for homeowners like Curt Scheewe. And so that's why he stepped up and did something about it. And right now it is a real pleasure to welcome to the show from beautiful North Vancouver, BC, born and raised in Spruce Grove, Alberta, Curt Scheewe. Welcome to the show, Curt. Thanks for making time for us.
Good morning, Brian and John.
You were, I don't want to say this, I know your friends and family love you, but you were a relative unknown
Yes.
up until a couple of weeks ago. And now the TikTok posts have literally millions of views, and national news outlets are talking to you. And hey, you're making your Real Talk debut because of a bear door you built on your fence. What's been going on before you built the door? Take us back in time. What's been happening?
Okay, so we moved here from Edmonton 10 years ago, and there was an old fence at the time. And I guess we're on a bear route. I didn't know till recently, obviously, but we're on a bear route. So the bear comes in the south side from the river, exit the north side of my yard to the street. And so I kind of patched up this old fence, but then a bear came along and just kept punching holes in it. I would fix it, he would punch holes, so then I just stopped fixing it.
Okay.
But about 6 weeks ago, we put in a brand new fence, a nice cedar 8-footer. And I thought he would either find another route or climb it or something. But no, within 2 days, my wife and I are sitting there watching Netflix, and I just see probably about 7 at night, and I just see the cedar planks disappearing, run out the board. The bear's just smacking them out one by one. He's going through. So we're standing around going, okay, I've got a brand new fence. I'm not just going to leave it open. Or leave the panel out. So at first I put in a 3-foot by 3-foot opening. I just framed it in. But then I realized my dog and other dogs can kind of come and go as they please. So I think it was my wife or my kids were like, oh, let's put in a doggy door, but for the bear. And we all kind of laughed that that was crazy. And I'm like, oh, I got a Saturday. It's not raining. I'll put in the door. And hinges from Rona didn't work. So I put in some copper pipe up top. And then I set one of my Arlo security cameras just right above it. We're thinking this is a long shot. This is never going to work. My friend sent me that bear crossing sign. It just showed up from Amazon on my door. So I pinned that up. Again, this is just a joke. And this will never work. Put the camera up, and then so we wait. And about 2 weeks later, the video that you're showing now, the bear comes down the driveway and goes through it like he's done it 1,000 times. And I sent that video to my neighbor. I'm like, holy crap, like this worked. I sent it to my neighbor who's on the other side of the fence. And they're friends with the Bear Society. So the Bear Society asked for it. Yeah, no problem. They put it on their Instagram, and then from there, like kaboom, it's gone. And so I've got 3 girls at home, and teenagers, so we're watching this. I'm not on Instagram. I'm not on TikTok. Social media is not my thing. But this thing's exploding, and then global North Shore news phones, then global news phones, then CBC national phones. And then Friday, I did 3 interviews with CBC downtown Vancouver for radio in Victoria, Kelowna, Vancouver. And then watching this thing on TikTok between a couple of places, it's like over 4 million views.
Yes.
And my daughters and I and my wife were just like, what is going on? Like, this is a bear door. And it was a total fluke. We did not think it was going to work. And it was really funny. I think it was Thursday when we're watching Instagram after Global News posted it. And it was at like 950,000. My girls come home from school. They're in my home office. We're like, wow, this is going to make 1 million. We're standing there. It crosses 1 million. Then we're kind of jumping around and hugging each other. And then we're like, okay, now what do we do? Like, do we live differently? Do we phone someone? Like, what happens? Like, this is just brand new.
You come on Real Talk.
It just exploded.
This is unbelievable stuff. So our live chat's loving it right now. But people do have questions.
Sure.
Some people are going, well, hang on a second. How long until the dog figures this out? And the dog gets lost on a big adventure. What does this door weigh, and are your dogs using it too?
No, so it weighs about 20 pounds, but my dog has full rein in the backyard. He does not have full rein in the front yard where this bear door is, but he gets out sometimes when we're unloading groceries or doing life stuff. He gets out. So he knows it's there, my dog. He's tried to push it open and hasn't, because even if he could get it open, that thing's going to pinch him pretty good if he tries to go through. So the dog doesn't have access. We've had people say, well, your kids are out there. Is this dangerous? No, we've been here 10 years. The bears come through 2 or 3 times a week from June to November. They've never bugged my kids. We used to have chickens. They never bugged the chickens, never bugged dogs.
Really?
They just want food. They want easy food. They don't want to fight. They don't want to argue. But also, they're stubbornly, you're not going to knock them off their route.
Clearly, they've busted up your fence multiple times. Yeah, I was going to ask you if you get a little bit nervous about, like, we're showing this amazing video you've provided from your security cameras, and I can imagine, like, is this nocturnal activity? Is it usually at night? Is there a chance you're bringing out the garbage and you run into this? What is that bear? It looks like a 500-600 pound bear. Yeah, it's a big. Well, again, like coming from Spruce Grove, there's never bears unless you're in Jasper or Banff. Right.
But moving here, bears are a regular occurrence. Like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, this one's walking down the street, knocking over the garbage bins, knocking over the compost bins. Wow. Like, it's very, very normal. But you've got the two extremes. People leave garbage out to attract them. They get their hand slapped. And then you get the other extreme. People are scared and they're calling the conservation people every time they see the bear.
Yeah.
We're kind of happily right in the middle. We love seeing the bear in our yard. We don't leave food out. It's never bugged my kids or my dog. But we don't want it. We want it there. We want it to go through our yard. And so we built the bear door. We can't believe it worked. And we want him to keep using the route.
Tracy has a very good question. You keep saying the bear, like singular, the bear. Is it the same bear every time, or has he told all of his friends?
So there's a few different bears over this summer. He's the main one that we see. And I mean, he's not, I don't know if he's tagged, but he's the same size, same mannerism, same attitude. There's a couple other bears that are a bit smaller, a bit faster. But this is the guy we've seen for the last probably 18 months pretty regularly.
Wow, unbelievable. Is it true that you've been approached by someone that is maybe interested in marketing this and monetizing this? And could you be onto something, do you think? Or is it a bit of a niche market?
Yes, very much so. Very much so. Yeah, we got contacted by someone out of New York that wants to promote it to the big media. And so there's an agreement you can sign for a certain percentage. And again, like, we're brand new to this. Like, we're not a private family, but we're not really on social media. And so we're just like, we're still in a bit of a daze that this is even still such a big deal, because we thought we just keep waiting for it to die down and you get your 12 minutes of fame and then enjoy it and then so be it. But it's still going, it's still building, people are still phoning. And here we are talking to you.
Yeah, here you are. Lauren's wondering if you've named the bear, if your kids have named the bear.
I can't repeat that name unless you're going to beep it out.
You can say whatever the fuck you want, buddy.
I named him Fat Ass.
Fat Ass.
He's big. Yeah. He's just got a big butt, and that's why we did the 3 foot by 3 foot opening. It's a big opening.
I love it. Dwayne says, kudos, you learned to grin and bear it. Blah, blah, blah. How about this from Kimberly? She's not wrong. Says you got to learn to coexist when you live in bear country. And Cheryl, I love this. Cheryl goes a little bit meta on this. She says, what an amazing way to show how we can find pathways to peace and ways to coexist without dominating and controlling others. What a great comment.
Absolutely. It's been like, I go through Instagram and TikTok and I read all the comments, and it's most of them are positive. Most of them are pretty funny. My favorite compliment, or some guy tried to, just compliment our family. And the best one so far was, I hope this guy's pillow was cold on both sides every night, or something along the lines of the comfort of a cold pillow every night. I laughed. That was my favorite.
Well, honestly, man, I haven't stopped smiling since I heard about this story, and I just think it's absolutely wonderful. I think it's hilarious that the bear uses it. Like it's like someone. I told someone that you were coming on the show yesterday, and they go, "Did he train the bear to use the door?" I go, "How's he going to train the bear?" No, he didn't train the bear. It's just such a great story. No wonder millions of people have loved it.
Didn't send me that bear sign, it wouldn't be as I don't think, successful, because the bear sign's there. He puts his paw right on it and pushes on the bear sign. Like, it couldn't be more perfect, more choreographed, but it's complete fluke, complete fluke. But that panel where he goes through, that's his route. Like, not 6 feet to the left or 6 feet to the right there. And that's why we put it there. That's his route. So he just followed his route, put his paw on the bear sign, and got his butt through there, and away we go.
This is easily my favorite news story of 2024, and I'm almost prepared to drop the gavel there. Curt Scheewe, shout out for this. Thanks for everything you did to make us smile. Keep up the great work. We'll check in a year, see how it's going.
Yeah, let's do it. Thanks, Ryan.
All right, brother. That's Curt Scheewe, an Alberta boy, joining us from his new home in North Vancouver, BC, the Bear Door. I absolutely love that.
I'm going to go on the record right now. I'm going to say top 3 positive reflections ever. Maybe,
I agree.
Maybe number 1.
I agree.
Probably top 2.
100%. 100%.
It's big.
We probably should leave it open for other entries, but I don't know how you're going to beat this one. If you have a positive reflection that you think could go toe-to-toe with this one, send it to us in an email. talk@ryanjesperson.com. We love stories that make us smile so big our faces hurt. Every week, Positive Reflections is proudly presented by our friends at Kuby Renewable Energy. You can get a free solar quote today at kubyenergy.ca. Coming up on the next episode of Real Talk, we're going to check in with media personality and Anglican priest Michael Koren about his new autobiography, Heaping Coals. Plus, of course, we'll be paying attention to the top news stories of the day. Thanks in advance for subscribing to Real Talk on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. We'll talk to you again soon.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson. Executive producer Josh Dunford. Technical producer John Hicks. General manager Katie Cook-Chivers. Account coordinator Lauren Sterlego. Human resources Lena Shepard. Website design Mike Johnston. Voiceover by me, Carrie Skelton. Real Talk's editorial board is Supriya Dwivedi, Ahmed Ali, Brandy Morin, Ann Castleman, Corey Hogan, Harmon Candola, Catherine O'Neill, and Chris Henderson. Member Emerita, Julie Rohr. Real Talk is recorded in Edmonton, Alberta on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux, home to the Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta. Real Talk